Good morning. On behalf of the One Lamb Initiative, we want to welcome you to this special forum class. Our mission at the One Lamb is to nurture mental wellness through education, through support, and through connections. And today, we ask for your help by completing a survey that each person in the room, in the sanctuary, will get a copy of that survey, and it would help us if you would complete it. Let us know what could be most helpful to you or your family or friends, and then return it at the back doors for us. We value your feedback. And just as a reminder, Ron will be signing books in the Dogwood gift store, and you can also buy copies of his newest book, The Quiet House, down there as well. 15 years ago, my husband died of cancer after a long illness, and our two boys were comforted by our loving family, precious friends, and the Peachtree Road congregation. It was only later that I realized something had been missed during that time of grief and loss. I yearned for a book, a devotional, that could identify with our loss, and a book that was honest, vulnerable, truth-telling, comforting, and hopeful. That book has now been written, The Quiet House, by our friend, teacher, and companion, Reverend Ron Greer. Ron, we are grateful for you, this book, and the strength that it will bring to so many of us. Thank you for sharing this intimate story.
To anyone else, it would have seemed such a little thing. Karen said, "Ron, let me show you how to do this." I was walking past the laundry room, and she was sorting clothes. "Let me show you how to do this," is all she said, without adding why I would soon need to know. She didn't say, and I didn't ask, because we both knew. A month later, we lost Karen. She died of cancer. In that moment, in the laundry room, she was pointing me to and preparing me for my life without her. These little moments often usher us into the big transitions of our lives. Life is filled with endings and beginnings. For the major passages, there is a swell of emotion. If it's a positive transition, we ascend to those mountaintop experiences. If it's a heartbreaking transition, we descend into the valley and begin that journey. Many of you know, because you have been there. The Quiet House is about one such valley. Specifically, is about the valley that we began after the loss of a spouse. A time often in the stillness and the quiet of a house alone. a time that involves mourning and healing, a time that eventually moves into restoration as we move through our grief and then slowly transition into our new lives. As I think about our time together this morning, I don't think of it as focused nearly so much on death and dying as I do life and living on through that valley, through that time of mourning, and into a new life that lies beyond. We will talk of grief and mourning, but it will be as a path to healing and wholeness. Bishop Will Willimon, scoot this back. Bishop Will Willimon is by far the most prolific writer within our denomination, having written over 70 books, 70. His wife Patsy says, Will has never had an unpublished thought. After doing my final proofread of The Quiet House, it struck me, I now have never had an unpublished feeling. I tell my story in the book, and I want to be very clear as I tell my story. My story is not the point. I tell my story for you to hear your story, for you to hear your story more clearly, for you to compare the two, the ways we parallel and the ways we differ, for you to be able to claim the journey that has been and perhaps continues to be yours. The word parable is a very interesting word. Of course, we all know what a parable is. A parable is a story with a lesson. That's not where it began. It began with a different meaning. It began with the Latin word parabole. Parabole, literally translated, a placing beside. A parable was a story that was placed beside the story of our lives in order to illuminate, in order to see how it could turn on new lights and we could gain new wisdom and new insight into the story of our own lives. That's why I have shared my story in the Quiet House. Not because it's my story, but because you have your story. To put alongside your story as a kind of parable so that you can see if it turns on any new lights, if it illuminates anything new in your life and in your life experience, that you can gain insight and wisdom and growth and then depth. And who knows? Perhaps as we do this together, neither of us will feel quite so alone on the journey. The title of the book, The Quiet House, comes from late Thanksgiving afternoon, 2020. It was our first Thanksgiving without Karen, 3 months after she had died. You can imagine that there was some emotion going into that. You can also well imagine, because you know Karen, you can also well imagine how her presence, how big it was on each of those occasions. And so as I wrote, so as we gathered, we each took a deep breath and braced ourselves for the plunge into unknown waters. The day went well. It went as well as it possibly could. We love each other, and let me tell you, I have got some absolute pieces of work in my family. They are absolutely delightful as they sit on the second pew down here today. And so we had a wonderful day. It was a day that we remembered Karen. We knew that we had been blessed with her presence for all those years, and now we were blessed with her memories and her spirit that was among us and was within us. It was a good day. And far too quickly, it was late afternoon. It was time for all of them to pack up and head back home. And so we said our goodbyes. I waved to them as they drove down the driveway, and I stood there until each of the cars had disappeared over the hill. And then I began the slow walk back to the house. I took a deep breath as I opened the door and stepped in. As I walked down that hallway, the house had never felt so empty. I had never had a holiday in 50 years without my life partner. Never had we waved goodbye to our family as they went back home following any occasion, but that we didn't walk back in together. The house felt so empty, and my heart felt so lonely. Never had it been so still, so silent. The house was quiet, so quiet. The scriptures refer to that very hallway in my house and in yours. It's called the valley of the shadow of death. It's those hallways that we walk down in the quiet following a major loss in our lives. We grieve, we mourn, we suffer as we go through that valley. And yet we go through the valley. The Scriptures is very clear about that. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we do not take up residence there. We go through to the other side. If we honor the lessons of the valley, if we honor the journey, and if we have the courage to mourn the loss. The lessons of the valley. So what are they? Let me share the lessons that I have learned. And by the way, as I do, let me share these lessons and I borrow this phrase from elsewhere, let me share these lessons not as the sage on the stage, but the guide by the side. We, as sisters and brothers, walk this valley together. So what have I learned? First, I have learned that grief and hope belong in the same sentence. We enter a valley of darkness with glimmers of hope. First, we mourn. There is heartache. We have lost those who are as dear to us as life itself. We have looked straight into the face of loss and grief. We have seen the shadows gather. Perhaps for any of us, it was as we heard the ER physician with his gaze to the floor say, "It doesn't look good." Or maybe it was as we walked out of the neurologist's office with a diagnosis that haunted us as we stepped each step to the car. Or maybe it was as we called hospice. Or maybe later, it was as we visited the cemetery. Or maybe it was out of the blue as we heard the innocent question from a new acquaintance as he asked, "And so, are you married?" and we struggle to maintain our composure. We know the darkness of the valley. We know the darkness, but we do not sit passively in the dark. We look for the glimmers of light. We look for the glimmers of hope. The light shines in the darkness, the scriptures say, and the darkness has not overcome it. We look for ways to navigate through and hopefully beyond the darkened landscape. Karen gave me a little plaque years and years ago. It has sat in our kitchen ever since. The plaque says, "You are my happily ever after." And she, of course, was mine. I have walked past that plaque thousands of times, but several weeks after Karen died, I was walking through the kitchen and I looked over, and that same plaque I had seen every day of my life since she gave it to me stopped me in my tracks. And I read it as I had never read it before. "You are my happily ever after." And immediately I asked myself the question, how am I going to be happy now that my happily ever after is gone? I stood there for the longest time. How am I going to be happy? Well, I said to myself, I'm about to find out. That is the attitude we take. I didn't know where the new path would take me, and I'm still learning. But I knew there was life ahead, and I was going to find it. It is an attitude of hope that we share. We believe that resurrections follow life's crucifixions. I suppose the words grief and hope don't often appear in the same sentence, and yet, well, they should. And the Christian faith is not shy about wedding the two together, as Paul wrote to the church in Thessalonica, "You may not grieve as others do, who have no hope." We grieve as those with hope. Hope in eternal life for those who have gone before us. Hope in new, fulfilled life for those who remain here. But we're hardly naive. We don't expect too much of the light. We don't expect too much of the hope early on. We know as we enter the dark valley that there will first be only glimmers. Frederick Buechner said it so well, "In the darkness of the church, the candles burn. They hold the darkness back, just barely. Hold it back." And we find there is light in our valleys. Not enough to eliminate the darkness, but enough to illuminate our way through it. We look for hope, but it must be real hope. It must be substantial. It must be grounded. It must be true. Nothing Pollyanna, nothing sugar-coated, none of those silly cliches we all have heard. Thank you very much. We need something real. It is the truth that sets us free, and not some fairy tale. Hope is a positive expectation grounded in reality. So where is my hope as I enter the valley? My hope is first in the journey. Again, I turn to the scriptures. Weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes in the morning. I enter the valley knowing that weeping will tarry for the night and for the next weeks and for the next months, but that joy will come in the morning. My first hope is in the hope of the journey. It begins with the loss, the heartbreaking loss, and then it involves the grief, and then the mourning, and then the healing, and then the transition, and then the turning of the page into a new life. Next, every loss is unique. Every grief is unique. Unique because of several factors, but unique first because each of our personalities are distinctive. Therefore, there is no one right way to mourn. There are some unhealthy ways, but there's not one correct, prescribed way of doing this important work. As I talk about my journey, please know that I'm being descriptive of my path. I'm not being prescriptive of yours. Yours will be unique to you. Therefore, we each have to find our own path, our way of expressing our grief for our own lives. So the first reason that everyone's grief path is going to be unique is because they are unique as persons. And the second reason is because the loved one that we lost, that is a unique relationship to us. Whoever your loved one was, that relationship was distinctive in terms of the closeness and the nature, the integrity of that relationship. I have lost parents. I've lost a child. I've lost other family members. I have lost loved ones, and now I have lost my spouse. And each of those losses are unique. The quiet house is about the loss of a spouse. And a part of the uniqueness, let me go back first. In the field of thanatology, the study of death and grief, it is understood when it comes to the loss of family members that the loss of a parent is more related to our past. The loss of a spouse is more related to our present, and the loss of a child is more related to our future. With the loss of a spouse, which is our focus in the quiet book, it's more related to the loss of our present, our day in, day out, present lives. We live together. Our lives are wrapped up in each other. Our present lifestyle, how we live, what we do, with whom we did so much of every day. So much of our lives were intertwined. The very fabric of our lives was interwoven. And then when they die, that fabric is ripped apart. And it's devastating. Many of you have been there. You know of what I speak. Each of those losses has their unique, distinct pain, acute pain. But that's the pain of the loss of the spouse, is that your present life and that present relationship with whom you were so intertwined is suddenly lost. I don't think there's a better way of saying it than the Scriptures. The two, and this is reflected on, is thought of far too rarely. The Scriptures say, the two shall become one. One. And when our spouse dies, it's like our whole other half died with it. as one. That's how it feels. You interacted through the day countless times. Something will happen, and I will think to myself, I've got to tell Karen about that. 50 years of practice will cause that. It was 2 months after Karen died. 2 months. This is how wrapped up, how intertwined our lives are. 2 months after Karen died, I was listening to a friend who was talking about a vacation they had been on. They'd been at the lodge down at St. Simon's. And they said they were sitting on the veranda at the lodge. And I think it was at 6 o'clock each afternoon, a bagpiper would step out onto the veranda and would serenade you for about 20 minutes. A bagpiper. I was married to Karen MacDonald Greer. Very Scottish. Each afternoon at 6 o'clock, a bagpiper would come out, he said, and the immediate thought that crossed my mind was, I've got to take Karen there. 2 months after she died, that complete thought crossed my mind before the obvious hit me. Superficially, we could say old habits die hard. The way I think it is, relationships that are that important get ingrained. They get engraved in our hearts and in our minds. And so for a time, we live in different worlds. Now, neurologists have a different way of expressing the same thing. They confirm neurologically the preference the brain has to previous life experiences. It sounds rather clinical. The implicit knowledge, as they say, that we have, has preference over current knowledge. It's deeply encoded at the subconscious level. Our conscious mind knows, but this is why it takes so long one of the reasons it takes so long for the mourning process to happen is because it is so ingrained and it takes time for that to be reprogrammed. A neurologist would say our spouses are encoded in our neurons. Scriptures say the two succeeded in becoming one, and our other half died, and we struggle to accept it, and we mourn. Next, we heal what we feel. In her final days, Karen and I talked periodically about what we knew was coming. She was far more at peace with her dying than I was. One day, she was seated at the kitchen table and I was standing leaning against the counter, and we were talking about her dying, and I just burst into tears. And as I cried, Karen slowly got up and she walked over to me and she wrapped her arms around me. I don't know how long I cried, but however long it was, with those now frail arms of hers, she held me and supported me as I cried. Finally, I finished. She stepped back and we looked at each other. It was then that it dawned on me. She was supporting me as I was crying about her dying. I laughed and I said, "Isn't there something backwards about this? Aren't I supposed to be supporting you?" We laughed together. No. She knew her time had come, and she was ready to go home. and I wasn't ready for her to leave. What she felt was peace. What I felt was grief. My journey through the valley had obviously begun. The word grief comes from the Latin gravis, that literally translates heavy. It shares, not surprisingly, the same word origin as the English word gravity, because grief is what pulls, it's the emotional weight that pulls us into the sorrow and the anguish and the mourning. Why do we feel grief so deeply? Because we love them so dearly. Always remember, where there is deep grief, there was great love. In times of grief, hope is found through expression. We heal what we feel. It's a pain that's begging to come out. Let me distinguish between two words, grief and mourning. Grief is the emotional blow that we feel when we receive the news of a loss. Grief is the emotional hit that we take. It's the profound sadness. It's the emotion that takes our breath away. That's grief. Mourning is what we then can choose to do with the grief, to give it a voice, to work it through. Grief is not optional. We will experience losses. Mourning is optional, and we are wise to opt for it. When you experience a major loss in your life, for those of you who are or will experience losses, and that's all of us, when you experience a major loss in your life, give your emotions a voice. Give them a voice. Cry it out, or talk it out, or for those who journal, write it out. But don't hold it in. Don't repress it. Don't deny it. Give it a voice. And this is the simple formula that I always think of. Anytime something happens to us that's got an important emotional component, we are infused with emotional input. It throws us off balance. It throws us into disequilibrium. The way we right the ship, the way we get back in balance from the input is with output. Give your grief a voice. I grew up in a wonderful family of origin, but dealing with emotion was not our long suit. Our unspoken family motto was, if you feel it, fake it. I think there is more wisdom in what I heard this dear elderly lady say one time. She said, well, I just figure when life gives you tribulations, the good Lord expects you to tribulate. A simple way to remember it is, suppression brings depression. Expression brings an emotional resurrection. Suppression brings depression. The depression from repressed emotion may come months or years later, but if I cap off important emotions that I feel, I am sooner or later going to experience a flattened affect. It is going to minimize the joy and vitality in my life. And this is the reason. Emotionally, you can't close the door to one important emotion without, to a degree, closing that door to all of your emotions. If I don't express it now, I will feel less joy and happiness and fulfillment in the days to come. If I don't express my grief now, I will pay that price. But expression brings emotional resurrection, a new life for a new day, hope to be realized as we engage our grieving. As St. John of the Cross put it, we will find a rainbow, but first we must find a place to watch the rain. Grieve, but grieve your way. You have a distinct style. You will need to discover it. It matters little how anybody else has ever done it. What matters is what has integrity for you. We always hear about someone has died, and so they will always use the phrase, and so their family has entered the grief process. There is no the grief process. There is your way of mourning, and your way, and your way, and my way. And each are unique to us, and each have integrity only for us. And for each of us, our style must be honored. If you keep your grief current, if you honor each of those emotions as they emerge, if you honor each of those waves of grief as they come over you, when your heart tells you it's time to grieve, you will find your emotions, your grief changing in 3 different ways. One is they will come in less frequently. Second, they will hit less powerfully. And third, they will recede more quickly. The next lesson from the valley is we need breaks in the action. Grief is exhausting. When you are going through the valley of the loss of someone so tenderly important to you, you must regularly step back. You must take a break. We need rest. We need renewal. We need restoration. And be intentional about it. Engage the activities and the relationships that restore you. Spend time with those people and do those things that give you life, that give you energy. Engage them and then linger with them. Spend some time in those activities and with those people so you can recharge and renew and be restored. Next, mourning requires patience. Mourning is not a task to be completed, but a process to be engaged. And it takes time because for important losses, this may well be the transition of our lives. Be patient. We are no longer where we were. We are no longer who we were. And where and who is yet to be determined. All we know is the ship has left the port, and the destination of where our lives will arrive is yet to be discovered. Yet, there is a God-given progression toward healing and wholeness. Again, there's nothing prescribed because we're all so unique. But I find that for me, there were phases that I went through. I encourage you to discover yours. The first phase I went through for the first few days and handful of weeks was emotional chaos. My life was upside down. The world I had known for 50 years no longer existed. That was my first phase. My second phase were weeks and weeks of deep grief and mourning. It wasn't quite chaos, but it was the first thought in the morning and it was the last thought in the evening. The pain, the awareness was that deep. And then following that, and by the way, each of these phases tend to be clusters of emotion. We tend to move into, out of, and then we'll occasionally come back and revisit. There's nothing neat or linear about it. The next phase, after the deep grief and mourning, was a long season of sorrow. It had lightened some because some healing had happened, but the sorrow was still very prominent and very present in my life. And then the next phase that tended to morph into was a time of transition with some early signs of healing. And then, much, much later, there was what I sensed was the beginning of a turning of the page into a new chapter of my life, a chapter of purpose and meaning and even joy. Early on, my pain was acute and constant. Then it became deep and consistent, and then tender and periodic. I see heads nodding. I'm obviously with my people. Grief is a process. Be patient as you give yourself to it. Next, healing is real. As we find that we heal from the losses of the death and then of their absence, we begin ever so slowly to feel better. As we go through the months and months and months, we feel the days are a little brighter, the load is a little lighter. We begin to create new lives, and they're good. We begin to enjoy them. The way I have said it for a long time is, I had a great life. Now, I have a good life, and I'm working to make it better and better. I must remember that. Karen's death was such a hit to me that I have to be intentional about remembering all the blessings and what a good life I still have, and to build on it. I must mourn her death, but not be defined by it. As Alfred Lord Tennyson said, though much is taken, much abides. Next, as we move along, as we heal and move along, expect what I call the scattered showers. You know how on a July afternoon it's just as sunny and beautiful as it can be, a warm summer day, and then suddenly it gets dark and it starts raining. Scattered showers. Months and months and years later, expect the scattered showers. It happened to me 2 days ago. I was thinking about this particular doctor who had treated Karen so kindly at a time that she was really struggling. And I thought of that doctor's kindness, and I could see his eyes, and I could hear the tone of his voice at a time that she needed all the kindness that she could get, and suddenly I was in tears. They were, as a friend of mine said, she said, sometimes my tears are mixed with joy and sadness. These were mixed with appreciation and sadness. And I had my shower. I had my scattered shower, and I got a good cry out on Friday morning, and then I went back to a very enjoyable day. Those July afternoon scattered showers are going to come over you, and it may be that something as you're driving down Roswell Road will remind you of your spouse or whoever your loved one is, or it may be a song will come on the radio, or it may be a smell, it may be anything that will bring back a memory, and you'll have your scattered shower. If you're in a private moment, let those tears out. Let them out. Shed those tears. And a little more of your grief farther down the road, a little more of your grief is going to happen, and more of the wound is going to heal. Next, through it all, we are grounded in our faith. A group of therapists where I did my training were standing around talking, and one of the therapists had just gone through a horrible experience. She described it in some detail, and she finished her description with this phrase. She said, "And so I just hit rock bottom." There was a long silence. And then one of the therapists, Tom, spoke up, and he said, "But isn't it good to know when you hit rock bottom that at the bottom there's a rock?" And I thought of the psalmist, "He only is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I shall not be greatly shaken." So many fear, some terrified in giving in to their grief, to their pain. My experience is if I allow myself to sink into my emotion, into my grief, I eventually arrive at a place in which I feel grounded and anchored. Something that feels remarkably like a rock. God waits for us there, and He will meet us there at our depth. Next, the presence of those who care is sacred ground. Slip off your sandals. If you are in the presence of compassion, you are on holy ground. Jesus said it. He said, "When 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, in my spirit, with my grace, with my compassion, where 2 or 3 are gathered as I would gather, I am with you. My spirit is with you. You are on sacred ground." I shall always remember, as most of you know, Karen and I, 40 years ago, we lost our son, Eric. And it was only a few weeks after Eric died. Patrick was in the den watching TV. I was here at the office. Karen was cleaning up the breakfast dishes, and she was in prayer as she was. She told me later. And she was praying, "God, please help me, help me, help me make it, God, help me make it." And the phone rang, and she picked it up. And it was one of her dearest friends who asked Karen with a voice of concern, "Karen, are you all right?" And she said, "I am now." Where 2 or 3 are gathered, we bring that kind of blessing. We bring that kind of compassion. It is sacred ground. As I have often said, professional counseling is rarely needed for most heartaches. What is needed is someone who is caring enough to visit, kind enough to ask how they are doing, and wise enough to be quiet and listen and listen. Do not ever underestimate the power of your presence. Your touch, your caring, loving touch to someone who is mourning means everything. Next, we may well emerge from the valley the stronger for having been there. Following any major loss, we will be changed. Let's make sure is for the better. We had no say in the losses we suffered, but we are absolutely in charge of how we respond to them. The experience of those who engage their grief, who courageously see this journey through, well, you can see a difference in their eyes. There's a clarity. There's a confidence. There's a wisdom. They have grown from the experience. It's the wisdom of someone who has been to life's center, who has returned with the clarity of what truly matters, an assurance of knowing who they are and of what they are made, and a confidence of taking that awareness with them into the rest of their lives. This time of mourning can be more than just a time of healing. It's also about becoming someone we have never been before. I write about this in The Quiet House in a chapter entitled The Hope of the Night. We all look forward to the sun breaking through at the far end of the valley as the wound moves through toward healing. But maybe, instead of always looking past my grief for when I get through the valley as my time of flourishing, perhaps, just perhaps, it is also in this time of pain and not just beyond it. There's insight, self-awareness, growth that can be gained only from the effort and sometimes the wounds. Through the ordeal, we become enlightened and strengthened. God can help us use to our advantage any hand life deals us. Within every darkness, there is grace. That grace, the gifts we gain from the darkness of the night, often include resiliency, character, and wisdom. I think of times of struggle or grief or distress in my life as visits to a place I can only call my soul. I go there, as do you, and return changed, having grown. And finally, joy will come with the morning. Weeping may linger for the night, but joy comes with the morning. We are a people of hope, or we would not be here. Hope that our loved ones are in God's eternal care. Hope that grace and support will be with us in our journeys. Hope that you will come out of this ordeal the stronger for having been there. Hope that you will carve out a new life, different but good for yourselves. And hope that joy will come with the morning. After the death of someone who is so very important to us, can we return to the life we knew? Can we go back? Of course not. But we can go forward. Someone I saw years ago in counseling gave me permission to quote her. I had not seen her in 3 years. She came back in for a session, and of course I asked, "So how are you doing?" And she said, "I'm doing well. I've still got my baggage, but I'm down to a carry-on." At first, after a profound personal loss, that may well be our goal, to get our grief down to a carry-on. Then, as time goes on, we aspire to new and meaningful lives. The joy that comes with the morning. The pendulum will swing back and forth. We will experience the scattered showers as we continue through our lives. But the healing will come, and it will be real. I experienced a major transition in moving into the next phase of my life after the first anniversary of Karen's death. Let me close by reading that portion. And I pick up in mid-thought. I looked at that gorgeous picture of her as I was about to leave my office this afternoon, following the first anniversary. I picked it up to see her closely. I got to be with her, were the words I instinctively said, feeling so blessed. Up to this day, I know I would have said, because I often had, I lost her. Just look at all I lost. Not this time. I got to be with her, were my words. I'm letting her suffering go, for she is at peace. I'm letting my longing go, for she is at rest. My focus is less on Karen's death than on her life, less on what I've lost than what I've lived, less on how she was with me, and more on how her spirit goes with me, less on my past and more on being present, less on where I've been than where I'm going. Now I'm living more in the present, looking to the future, and thankful, profoundly thankful for the past. And I am deeply thankful for each of you being here with us this morning. Thank you so much.